What's up, girls? I just read The Second Sex, Volume 2 by Simone de Beauvoir. Um, Incredibly long, incredibly good. Uh, I was blown away. I liked it way, way more than I thought I would, honestly. Um, I was kind of like reading it because I thought uh, it would be good to read something that was like a little bit outside of my wheelhouse. I'm writing a female protagonist right now in my second novel, and so I've been trying to kind of like explore like the felt experience of being a woman. And I realized as I read this book, like I had made some improper assumptions about it, which was interesting. I think for a lot of these kind of like very famous canonical books, I tend to make assumptions about them before I've read them, just based on like the people that read them, um, where they kind of fit culturally, et cetera, et cetera. I had kind of a similar experience when I read the Bible because, you know, there's been a lot of religious oppression in the West over time, and you know, no, I don't think anything in the Bible really dictates um, people's ability to be able to do a lot of the negative behaviors they like to justify by, referencing the Bible. I felt similarly about The Second Sex and Simone de Beauvoir. Like I kind of assumed it to be man-hating a little bit, especially in the second volume, because the first volume is like her formal argument that kind of maps out like the discrepancies between the two genders, like over time, by like kind of documenting their different political rights in different societies, different historical treatments, cultural treatments, the different place of women in myth, religious myth or whatever. And then in the lived experience, I kind of assumed it to be like, men are awful, whatever, society is not set up for women, and it's kind of this like choreographed, malicious, oppressive thing, this trick that like men have pulled. And it's really not that way at all. Her argument is like that it would be mutually beneficial to both genders for women to have complete autonomy and independence with both political rights, in the workplace, in the household, etc. And I totally agree with that, So that was really cool. She documents throughout the second volume. She goes through, kind of the order of like a theoretical woman's life, by starting with adolescence, like romance, motherhood, marriage, motherhood, getting older, etc. And then she dives into like, non-time oriented categories like the narcissist, woman in love, and then at the very end she kind of, spends the last portion of the book, kind of like talking about her hopes for the future, et cetera, et cetera. The one thing I will say is that sometimes in like philosophy that is, trying to achieve some sort of progress, oftentimes I'll see that as a rhetorical device, they make the individual experience of the group that they're trying to achieve process for seem worse than it is. So like she talks a lot about like the horror of childbirth, and marriage and certain things, and and like kind of like the horror of like women's relationship with their own body, and how it can be kind of like terrifying. And I feel like, just like anecdotally, I don't think a lot of women experience their own bodies or childbirth or like the institution of marriage that way. At least not like, in the modern West, but she's making things sound a little bit worse than they are psychologically in order to, like advocate for progress. And I totally agree with the outcome that she's advocating for. Like, she's advocating for certain certain pregnancy rights for women and marriage rights and whatever. So totally understand. I think some of the descriptions of the negative psychological experiences of being a woman have kind of maybe outlived the noble lie that they were created for. Or not like lie, but she kind of makes things, I think, sound a little bit worse than they are, because she's really advocating for like abortion rights. She's writing in France in the 40s, and she talks about how it's like a class thing, and you basically have to travel to Switzerland if you want to get one, and lower class French women don't have access, and et cetera, et cetera. So totally get why she does it. I just think sometimes people, at present day in the West, will read about negative psychological experience that have certain aims for policy, and then they kind of interpret that rhetoric as their own lived experience, and it kind of degrades their mental health individually. But I think that what she's trying to achieve is great, and I agree with it. She's very funny in parts. She'll she'll talk about how the housewife who has not really had a chance to externalize her passions, and who will be sitting home all day, will then take it upon herself to make her husband's life a living hell. And all of her time and energy will then be dedicated towards kind of maybe manipulating him emotionally or whatever. Thought that was hilarious. She literally will sometimes, there was one section where she was talking about the woman in love, and she literally brings up the example of a girl saying to a guy, would you love me, are you gonna love me forever, would you love me if I was fat, which I thought was hilarious, because that's such an internet meme. She talks about the alchemical kind of nature of a woman's body, because they have less bodily autonomy relative to men because of their menstrual cycles and childbirthing process, that women's belief systems are more prone to a certain mysticism or religiosity. So she talks about women are more susceptible to believing in things like zodiac signs or palm readers, or psychics, which I thought was hilarious, and also just anecdotally true. And the final argument is kind of interesting, which is that women having full independence in society is going to be beneficial for both genders, and I totally agree with that. And then she goes into this quote by Montaigne, which is, "It's easier to accuse one sex than to excuse the other." And she talks about this dual issue with gender discrepancies, in that both sides kind of accuse the other and excuse themselves from their own complicit part in women not achieving full independence in modern Western society. I'm running out of time. I have so much to talk about for this book, but I loved reading it. I honestly think every guy should read it, because it was just kind of eye-opening, but check it out.